What if the key to $1 billion corporate crisis wasn't hidden in code, but in a dead language? For billionaire Arthur Sterling, the world was crashing down. His quantum security firm, the most advanced on the planet, was being bled dry by a ghost, a hacker no one could trace. His team of geniuses was stumped. The only clue was a single line of Latin, a taunt from the digital abyss. The answer wasn't in a sterile lab or a government facility. It was found on a drizzly Tuesday night in a Manhattan trattoria, whispered by a waitress who was about to prove that the most powerful weapon isn't technology, but history. The rain fell on the windows of Trattoria Sospiri. In a relentless, percussive rhythm, each drop a tiny hammer against the glass. Inside, the world was a warm, amber-lit bubble of clinking silverware, murmured conversations, and the rich scent of garlic and oregano. For Eleanor Vance, it was a familiar cage. Each table she cleared, each order of cacio e pepe she delivered, was another bar in the structure of her life, a life she hadn't chosen, but one she was forced to endure. Tonight her hands felt raw from the dishwater, and a deep ache had settled between her shoulder blades. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long hours and profound weariness. Her focus was narrowed to the immediate Table 7 needed water. Table 4 was ready for the check, and the imperious-looking man at Table 12 was staring at his tablet with an intensity that could melt steel. That man was Arthur Sterling. To the world, Arthur Sterling was less a man and more a monolith. The founder and CEO of Sterling Enterprises, he was the architect of the digital age's most secure fortress. His company didn't just build firewalls. They pioneered quantum encryption, creating systems so complex they were considered unbreakable. Yet for the past 72 hours, Arthur's fortress had been bleeding, and he was the only one who knew the wound was fatal. He wasn't eating. The perfectly prepared risotto al tartufo sat cooling in front of him, its earthy aroma lost to the sterile, panicked air of the video conference displayed on his tablet. On the screen, 4 faces, the brain trust of his cybersecurity division, stared back at him, their expressions a mixture of fear and intellectual exhaustion. "It's a ghost, Arthur," said David Chen, his lead cryptographer, his voice tinny through the device's speakers. "We've run every diagnostic. There's no brute force entry, no phishing scam, no Trojan. The data is just vanishing. Siphoned from the core servers, but the logs show nothing. It's like someone is walking through walls. Walls I paid you a collective $10 million a year to build." Arthur's voice was low, dangerously calm. "For 3 days, we have been hemorrhaging proprietary data on the Helios quantum chip. If that design gets out, we aren't just ruined. We've just handed the keys to the kingdom to a rival nation or a corporate entity that will gut us. Find something." "We have one thing," another analyst, a woman named Maria, interjected nervously. "The ghost leaves a signature. After each data packet is extracted, a single file is left in its place, a text file. It contains the same line every time." She shared her screen. On the tablet, in a stark, monospaced font, were 5 words. "Silentium est aurum, sed veritas est adamantina." Arthur stared at the phrase. He'd had it translated an hour in. "Silence is golden, but truth is adamantine," he recited flatly. "It's a taunt, a philosophical bit of nonsense." "We think it might be a clue to the encryption key they're using," David said, "but we can't find the phrase anywhere. It's not a direct quote from any known classical text. It seems like a pastiche, a custom-made proverb. We're running algorithmic analyses on it, breaking down the linguistic roots, but it's yielding nothing." Elena, refilling a water glass at the adjacent table, overheard them. Her body froze. The Latin words, spoken with the clipped, sterile accent of the corporate world, felt like an electric shock. They were a language she hadn't allowed herself to speak or even think in for 3 years. It was the language of her father, of her past, of a life she had meticulously buried under a mountain of grief and debt. Her father, Professor Alistair Vance, had been the head of the classics department at Princeton University. He was a titan in his field, a man who could breathe life into the dead languages of antiquity. He lived and breathed Latin and ancient Greek. For him, they weren't dead. They were simply sleeping, waiting for the right mind to reawaken their power. Eleanor had been his prize pupil, his prodigy. She was halfway through her own PhD, specializing in late-period Roman poets, when the diagnosis came. A glioblastoma. Aggressive. Final. The ensuing 2 years had hollowed her out, a blur of hospital corridors, crushing medical bills, and the slow, agonizing dimming of the most brilliant light she had ever known. When he died, he left her with his books, his legacy, and over $400,000 in medical debt. The fellowship for her PhD was a pittance against that mountain. So she had done the unthinkable. She quit. She walked away from the Bodleian Library, summers the scent of old parchment, the thrill of intellectual discovery. She sold her father's beloved collection of first editions, moved into a tiny apartment in Queens, and took a job at Trattoria Sospiri. Now standing just feet from Arthur Sterling's table, the language of that abandoned world had just breached the walls of her new one. Unconsciously, her lips formed the words. She whispered them to herself, a ghost of a sound barely louder than the falling rain. Silentium est aurum, said, veritas est adamantina. But she didn't just whisper the translation. A lifetime of study, a muscle memory of the soul took over. She spoke with the intonation of a classicist, feeling the rhythm, the cadence, the unspoken context. It's not just a pastiche, she murmured, her voice so low she thought it was only for herself. The structure is wrong for a proverb. Adamantina, it's post-classical. But the syntax, the rhythm, it mimics Lucan. It's deliberately archaic and confrontational. Arthur Sterling's head snapped up, his eyes the color of a stormy sea locked onto hers. In the bustling restaurant, amidst the noise and chatter, his hearing honed by years of needing to detect the slightest waver in a negotiator's voice, had snagged on her whisper. "What did you just say?" He asked, his voice cutting through the restaurant's din and silencing the conference call on his tablet. Elena's blood ran cold. The bubble of her anonymity had just been burst. She looked at the billionaire, at the 4 stunned faces on the tablet, and for the first time in 3 years, the waitress vanished, and the scholar stared back. The world seemed to shrink to the space between table 12 and the water pitcher in Eleanor's hand. The ambient noise of the trattoria faded into a dull roar, like the sea heard from inside a seashell. Arthur Sterling's gaze was not unkind, but it was intensely penetrating, the look of a man who could assess the value of a company or a person in a single sweeping glance. Elena felt her waitress instincts kick in. Apologize, retreat, become invisible. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just thinking aloud." "You said Lucan," Arthur stated, not as a question, but as a demand for elaboration. He muted the call on his tablet, giving her his undivided attention. The 4 faces of his cybersecurity team remained on screen, watching the bizarre interaction unfold like spectators at a play they didn't understand. Elena's throat was dry. Yes, the Roman poet, Marcus Annius Lucanus. His work, the Pharsalia, is known for its dark, almost violent syntax. It's dramatic anti-authoritarian. Your hacker's phrase. It isn't Ciceronian prose or Horatian verse. It's structured like a line Lucan would have written. It's meant to be a challenge, aggressive, uncompromising. She spoke with a quiet authority that had been dormant for years. It felt strange and exhilarating, like stretching a limb that had long been asleep. Arthur leaned forward slightly. And adamantina. It's a later Latin word derived from the Greek adamas. It means unconquerable, or like a diamond. The poet Prudentius used it in the 4th century AD. So your hacker is mixing periods. They're not just quoting something they found online. They are composing. They are showing off a very specific, very deep knowledge of the language and its evolution. They're telling you that their truth, whatever it is unbreakable. And they're doing it in the style of a poet who chronicled a bloody civil war. A profound silence settled over the table. David Chen's face on the tablet was a mask of disbelief. He had spent the last 8 hours running linguistic algorithms on those 5 words. This waitress in less than 30 seconds had provided more context and insight than his multi-million-dollar software suite had. Arthur Sterling did something few had ever seen him do. He looked genuinely surprised. He studied Eleanor, taking in the faint shadows under her eyes, the simple black uniform, the way she held the heavy water pitcher, as if it were an extension of her arm. He saw the dissonance between the person she appeared to be and the intellect she had just revealed. "Who are you?" he asked the question simple and direct. "I'm your waitress, sir," she said, her shield of professional humility snapping back into place. "Can I get you anything else?" "No," he said, holding her gaze. "You can sit down." He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Elena hesitated. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Marco, was already shooting daggers at her from across the room. "Sir, I can't. I'm working." Arthur pulled out his wallet. He placed a black card to the Amex Centurion, a piece of anodized titanium that was a legend in itself on the table. "Marco." He called out, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. Marco scurried over his face, a mess of anxiety. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Arthur said. "I'm hiring your waitress for the rest of the night. In fact, for the foreseeable future. This should cover her shift and any inconvenience to you." He slid the card toward Marco. "Run it for $10,000. Consider it a tip for your excellent service." Marco's jaw went slack. He stared at the card, then at Eleanor, then back at the card, as if it were a holy relic. He nodded dumbly and scurried away. Eleanor was stunned into silence. She was being bought her time commandeered as easily as ordering a bottle of wine. A wave of resentment washed over her, but it was quickly followed by a powerful, undeniable current of curiosity. The problem Arthur Sterling was facing was a puzzle, a riddle wrapped in the language she loved. It was a call from a world she thought she had lost forever. She slowly placed the water pitcher on a nearby service stand and slid into the chair opposite him. It was the first time she had sat down in 5 hours. Arthur unmuted his tablet. "Everyone, I'm sorry I didn't get your name." "Elena. Elena Vance." "This is Elena Vance," Arthur announced to his team. "She is our new linguistic consultant. David, send Ms. Vance a secure link to the case file. Everything. The logs, the signature files, your team's current analysis. Everything you have." David Chen looked aghast. "Arthur, with all due respect, we can't just share the Helios file with a civilian. The security protocols." "The security protocols have failed." Arthur cut him off, his voice like ice. "The walls have been breached. Our conventional methods are useless. We are fighting a classicist, and it seems we need one of our own. Do it. Now." David's mouth tightened, but he nodded. Arthur turned his attention back to Eleanor. The warmth of the restaurant seemed to fade away, replaced by the cold, high-stakes reality of his world. "Ms. Vance," he began his tone, shifting from commanding CEO to something more akin to a recruiter. "I'm in a great deal of trouble. My company, the foundation of my life's work, is under a sophisticated and invisible attack. This phrase is our only lead. I don't know what you did before you worked here, and right now I don't care. What I do care about is that in 30 seconds you understood more about the mind of our opponent than my team of certified geniuses has in 3 days. I will pay you $200,000 for 1 week of your time. If you can help us identify this person or the method they are using, I will pay you a bonus of $1 million. All I require is your expertise and a signed non-disclosure agreement." Elena's mind reeled. The numbers were astronomical, life-altering. $1 million would not just clear her father's debt. It would give her back her life, her future, her freedom to return to her studies. It was an escape hatch from the cage, but it was more than the money. It was the problem itself. Veritas est adamantina. The truth is unbreakable. The hacker wasn't just stealing. They were making a statement. This was a battle of wits, a philosophical duel being fought with code and Latin. Her father would have been fascinated. For the first time in years, Elena felt that old familiar spark, the thrill of the chase, the hunger for a solution. She looked at Arthur Sterling, a man who commanded empires of data from glass towers, now turning to a waitress in a neighborhood trattoria for salvation. "The NDA will need to be reviewed by my lawyer," she said, her voice steady despite the wild fluttering in her chest. She didn't have a lawyer, but she knew she should have one. Arthur nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Of course. My legal team will be in touch. For now, we can operate on a preliminary agreement. We can have it drafted in the next 20 minutes. He gestured to the tablet. "Welcome to the war room, Ms. Vance." Elena looked at the screen at the lines of code and data streams scrolling past. It was a world away from taking dinner orders. The fear was real, a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, the scholar within her was awakening, hungry and ready. She was about to step out of the shadows and into the blinding light of an impossible case. The next morning, Elena stood at the foot of the Sterling Tower. It was a shard of obsidian and steel, piercing the Manhattan skyline, a monument to the cold, hard logic of the digital age. Yesterday she had been wiping down tables. Today she was walking through the lobby on a temporary visitor's pass that identified her as a special consultant, a title so vague and important-sounding that it made her want to laugh. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalist design, white marble floors, soaring ceilings, and a digital waterfall cascading down one wall, displaying streams of benign market data. The air itself felt different, filtered, temperature-controlled, devoid of the messy organic sense of the city outside. It was the atmosphere of a world hermetically sealed against the chaos of ordinary life. Arthur Sterling met her himself, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the employees who watched the exchange with discreet curiosity. He was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored grey suit, a stark contrast to her own attire, the best she could manage a pair of dark slacks and a simple white blouse she'd bought at a discount store. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he said, his tone all business. "We have a secure workstation prepared for you. My head of security, a man named Michael Corrigan, has already conducted a preliminary background check. Your academic record is impressive, and your reason for leaving Princeton is noted." There was a flicker of something empathy, perhaps, in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." Elena simply nodded, unsure how to respond. The mention of her father and her abandoned life still felt like an open wound. He led her to a glass-walled conference room on the 80th floor. The view was breathtaking, the city sprawling below like a circuit board. Inside, the cybersecurity team was already assembled. David Chen sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid. He and the others looked at Elena as if she were an alien specimen, a strange artifact from an analog world that had no place here. "This is the war room," Arthur announced. "Miss Vance will be working with you. Give her anything she needs. David, bring her up to speed." With that, Arthur left, and the atmosphere in the room immediately chilled. David Chen stood and began his briefing, his tone clipped and condescending. He spoke in a rapid-fire torrent of acronyms and technical jargon, DDoS attacks, SQL injections, zero-day exploits, quantum tunneling algorithms. It was a deliberate display, meant to intimidate and exclude her. Elena listened patiently, not interrupting. He projected the hacker's signature file onto a massive screen. "Silentium est aurum, sed veritas est adamantina." When he finally finished, he turned to her, a smirk playing on his lips. "So, Miss Vance, any more poetic insights for us?" The rest of the team shifted uncomfortably. Elena ignored the jibe. "You're looking at the hack as a technological problem," she said, her voice calm and even. "You're analyzing the what. I believe the answer is in the who and the why. This phrase isn't a key. It's a mission statement. It's the hacker's entire philosophy, distilled into 5 words." She walked to the screen. "You were right that it's a pastiche. But it's more than that. It's a carefully constructed puzzle. The use of adamantina is the first clue. It's rare. A classicist would know it, but it's not common knowledge. This narrows our field. We're looking for someone with a PhD-level education in classics, not just someone who used an online translator." "Great," David scoffed. "So we're looking for a rogue professor, not a hacker in a basement in Estonia. How does that help us stop the data bleed?" "Because," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength, "a person with that background doesn't just choose words, they choose ideas. I spent last night reading, not code, but Lucan's Pharsalia. It's an epic poem about the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. It's a story about the collapse of a republic, about ambition, turning loyalty to poison. It's filled with bitterness towards a system that Lucan felt had become corrupt and tyrannical." She turned to face them. "Your hacker sees themselves as a figure from this poem, a rebel fighting against an empire. They see Sterling Enterprises not as a company, but as a modern Rome. And they see Mr. Sterling as Caesar, a powerful autocratic figure. This isn't about money. This is personal. This is about revenge." A younger analyst named Ben, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. "So they think they're Brutus." "Worse," Elena said. "They probably see themselves as Lucan himself, the historian of the fall, the one exposing the unbreakable truth behind the golden silence of corporate power." She requested access to a terminal. The team watched skeptical, as she didn't open a code editor or a network analyzer. She opened a web browser and navigated to JSTOR and other academic databases, the digital libraries she hadn't been able to afford access to for years. Her workstation became an island of the humanities in a sea of technology. While the team furiously traced phantom data packets and analyzed server architecture, Elena compiled a different kind of profile. She cross-referenced lists of former Sterling employees with alumni records from top university classics programs. She searched for academic papers that cited both Lucan and Prudentius. She wasn't looking for a digital footprint. She was looking for an intellectual one. Hours turned into a day, then 2. The data hemorrhaging continued slow and steady, 1,000 cuts bleeding the company dry. The pressure in the war room was immense. David Chen and his team were growing more frustrated, their high-tech methods yielding nothing. They treated Eleanor with a thinly veiled disdain, muttering about the witch doctor and her books. Eleanor ignored them. She felt alive, her mind firing on all cylinders. She was back in her element, the thrill of research, of connecting disparate threads of information coursing through her veins. On the evening of the second day, she found it. It was a footnote in an obscure 20-year-old academic journal, an article about rhetorical structures in post-classical Latin poetry. The author was a brilliant, promising young scholar from Yale. His name was Dr. Marcus Thorne. The name itself didn't mean anything, but when she cross-referenced it with Sterling's employee database, a hit came back. Marcus Thorne had been employed by Sterling Enterprises 8 years ago, not as a programmer but as a senior ethicist and research analyst in a long-defunct R&D division. His employment had been terminated. The reason cited insubordination and unauthorized use of company resources. Elena felt a jolt. She pulled up Thorne's file. The photo showed a man with intense, intelligent eyes and a bitter set to his mouth. She dug deeper, finding the details of his termination. Thorne had been the head of a highly theoretical and controversial project, a project codenamed Cassandra. The project's goal was to explore new methods of data steganography, the art of hiding information in plain sight. Thorne's approach was radical. He believed he could embed vast amounts of encrypted data within the noise of a system, error logs, junk data, even the rhythmic patterns of server cooling fans, by structuring the noise according to the complex metrical and rhetorical patterns of ancient poetry. His theory was that while a computer would see only random noise, a human mind trained to see the underlying classical structure could extract the hidden message. The project was deemed a failure. Arthur Sterling himself had shut it down, calling it an impractical academic vanity project. Marcus Thorne was fired. His career in the corporate world was over. His academic career had already been derailed. He had vanished. Elena stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The pieces were clicking into place with a terrifying certainty. The hack wasn't a break-in. There was no ghost walking through walls. The hacker wasn't taking data out. They had found a way to broadcast it in plain sight. The data wasn't vanishing. It was being disguised as meaningless noise structured by the very poetic rhythms Thorne had spent his life studying. She stood up her chair, scraping against the floor. "I've found him," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the room. "And I know how he's doing it. You're not looking for a ghost. You're looking for a poet." Every head in the war room turned towards Elena. The air already thick with tension, and the hum of servers grew still. David Chen crossed his arms, his expression a fortress of skepticism. "A poet? What are you talking about?" "His name is Dr. Marcus Thorne." Elena announced, her voice resonating with newfound confidence. She projected Thorne's employee file onto the main screen. He was a classicist from Yale before he was a research analyst here. He was fired 8 years ago. His specialty was the intersection of classical rhetoric and information theory. She then pulled up the file for Project Cassandra. Most of it was redacted, but the project summary was clear. Thorne's theory was that you could hide data not by encrypting it, but by structuring it. She explained, walking the team through her discovery. He believed that the complex metrical feat of Latin poetry dactyls, spondees, iambs could be used as a framework. Imagine a sequence of data packets. Some are long, some are short. To a computer, it's just binary. But if you arrange the sequence to follow the dactylic hexameter of Virgil's Aeneid, it stops being random noise. It becomes a message hidden in the rhythm. Ben, the young analyst, started typing furiously. So the stolen data isn't gone. It's being rebroadcast. Exactly, Elena confirmed. He's not breaking through your firewalls. He's making your own systems sing a song you're not trained to hear. He's hidden the data in the very logs you're using to find him. The error reports the server status, pings the temperature fluctuation logs. It's all part of his symphony. The Latin phrase wasn't just a signature. It was the key to the entire methodology. He was telling you, I'm using the style of Lucan. He was pointing you to the rhythm, the ars poetica of his hack. David Chen shook his head, a dismissive sneer on his face. This is absurd. It's the most convoluted, inefficient method of data transfer I've ever heard of. Why would anyone do this? Because it's not about efficiency. Elena shot back, her patience finally cracking. It's about humiliation. It's about proving that his impractical academic vanity project could bring this entire company to its knees. It's about showing Arthur Sterling that the very thing he dismissed the humanities history poetry is more powerful than all his quantum algorithms. He's built a lock that can only be opened with a key from the ancient world. Arthur Sterling chose that moment to enter the room. He had been observing from his office via a live feed, and he had heard everything. "Prove it, Miss Vance," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of command. The challenge was laid. The entire team turned to watch her. This was her moment. All her years of obscure study of memorizing scansion and analyzing rhetorical devices had led to this. "Give me the raw server logs from the last 24 hours, she said to Ben. "Not the interpreted data, just the raw output. Everything." Ben, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, quickly isolated the logs and sent them to her workstation. The screen filled with an endless cascading waterfall of alphanumeric gibberish. To the trained eyes of the tech team, it was just system noise. To Elena, it was a text waiting to be read. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. Lucan, like most epic poets of his time, used dactylic hexameter. That's a pattern of 6 feet per line. Each foot is either a dactyl, one long syllable followed by 2 short ones, or a spondee, which is 2 long syllables. She continued, "Let's assign a value. Let's say any data packet over a certain size is a long syllable or a 1. Anything under that size is a short syllable or a 0. We're not looking at the content of the packets. We're looking at their size, their rhythm." David scoffed. "You're trying to turn our server logs into Morse code." "No," Elena corrected him. "I'm turning them into poetry." For the next hour, Elena and Ben worked together. She would call out the patterns she was looking for, the metrical feet of Lucan's verse, and Ben would write a simple script to parse the massive log files, searching for sequences that matched. The rest of the team watched their initial mockery slowly dissolving into a state of rapt attention. It was like watching a master locksmith listen to the tumblers of an unpickable lock. Elena worked with a furious intensity. This was the world she was born for. She wasn't a waitress. She was a detective of history, a code breaker of forgotten languages. Finally, Ben stopped typing. "I've got something," he said, his voice hushed. "There's a recurring pattern, a sequence that matches the dactylic hexameter structure you described. It's embedded in the timestamp data of the firewall error logs. It repeats every 6 feet, just like you said." "Isolate it," Elena commanded, her heart hammering. "Filter out everything else, and show me just that pattern." Ben's fingers flew across the keyboard. A new screen appeared, displaying the filtered data. It was still a string of numbers and letters, but now it had a clear repeating structure. It was no longer noise, it was a signal. "Now," Elena said, "we need to translate it. The content of those long and short packets must be the data itself, broken into pieces and disguised." This was the bridge between her world and theirs. David Chen, his skepticism finally shattered by the undeniable evidence on the screen, stepped forward. My team can handle the reassembly. If he's broken the Helios chip data into these fragments, we can write a program to piece them back together based on this poetic sequence. The entire dynamic of the room had shifted. Disdain had turned into awe. Elena Vance was no longer the waitress. She was the one who had seen the music behind the static, the poetry behind the chaos. Arthur Sterling, who had been watching from the back of the room, walked over to her workstation. He looked at the screen displaying the rhythmic pattern, then at Elena. "You've found his method," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Now can you find him?" Elena looked back at the file for Project Cassandra. "I think so," she said. The project was shut down, but the research wasn't destroyed. It was archived. In the proposal, Thorne mentioned a specific physical location where he conducted his initial experiments, a place, he said, had the right kind of ambient noise for his tests. She pointed to a line in the document. "The old Bell Labs complex in Holmdel, New Jersey. It's been mostly abandoned for years. He needed a place with a massive server infrastructure that was no longer monitored. A ghost town for a ghost." The hunt was on, not for a hacker in some far-flung country, but for a disgraced scholar hiding in the ruins of a fallen empire of technology, broadcasting his revenge in the language of the Caesars. The drive to Holmdel, New Jersey, was conducted in a tense, surreal silence. Elena sat in the back of one of Arthur Sterling's black armored sedans, a Maybach that smelled of leather and quiet power. Arthur sat beside her, staring out the window, while Michael Corrigan, the head of security, rode in the front passenger seat, speaking in low-clipped tones into a secure communication device. A second vehicle carrying David Chen and a tactical tech team followed behind. They were heading towards a ghost. The Bell Labs Holmdel complex was a legend in the world of technology. It was where the transistor was developed, where the echoes of the Big Bang were first detected. It was a cradle of 20th century innovation. Now it was largely a relic, a 2 million square foot glass tomb, its miles of corridors mostly empty. It was the perfect place for a man like Marcus Thorne to hide a place haunted by the ghosts of brilliant ideas and abandoned projects. Thorne was more than just a classicist, Arthur said, suddenly breaking the silence. His voice was reflective. He was a polymath. Brilliant. But he was arrogant. He couldn't accept that some ideas, no matter how beautiful, are not commercially viable. When I shut down Project Cassandra, I told him it was elegant, but useless. He looked at me as if I'd desecrated a temple. He said I was a barbarian king sitting on a golden throne, blind to the true nature of treasure. Elena thought of her own father, who had often railed against the corporate commodification of knowledge. She could almost understand Thorne's rage, the fury of an intellectual whose life's work was dismissed as a novelty. He felt you disrespected his life's work, Elena said softly. So he's using that same work to dismantle yours. Poetic justice, Arthur mused, a bitter irony in his tone. When they arrived, the complex loomed before them, a massive mirrored structure reflecting the grey, overcast sky. It was eerily quiet. Corrigan's team, working with local law enforcement, who had quietly secured a perimeter, confirmed the building's primary power grid was mostly offline, but there was a significant anomalous power draw from one of the old server farm wings. "He's here," Corrigan confirmed. "He's tapped into a secondary power line. He's got his own little kingdom running in there." They entered through a service door, the hiss of the hydraulics echoing in the cavernous, silent space. The air inside was cool and stale, smelling of dust and old electronics. They were in a labyrinth of empty cubicles and deserted laboratories. Their footsteps echoed unnervingly. David Chen and his team set up a mobile command center, their glowing laptops and portable servers a stark island of modernity in the decaying hall. We can triangulate his exact location based on the network signals he's putting out, David said, his earlier arrogance replaced by a focused professionalism. He's not just broadcasting the Helios data. He's running a network to monitor our response. He's watching us. He wants us to know he's watching, Elena countered. It's part of the performance. Lucan's Pharsalia is meant to be read aloud to be witnessed. He wants an audience for his final act. As David's team worked on tracing the signal, Elena felt a pull to explore. This was Thorne's world. To understand him, she needed to see it through his eyes. With Arthur and Corrigan flanking her, she walked deeper into the facility. They found his nest in what was once the primary mainframe control room. It was a scene of organized chaos. Modern high-end servers were wired into the decaying infrastructure of the 1980s. Cables snaked across the floor like vines. The hum of the machines was the only sound. Multiple monitors displayed streams of code, Sterling's internal network traffic, and news feeds about the company. And everywhere there were books, piles of them. Hardcover editions of Ovid Tacitus, Seneca, and most prominently, multiple translations and commentaries on Lucan's Pharsalia. On a central whiteboard amidst complex network diagrams, Thorne had scrawled lines of Latin verse. It was a shrine to his obsession. But Thorne himself was not there. "He's cleared out," Corrigan said, his hand on his sidearm. "He must have seen us coming." "No." David Chen's voice came over the comms unit in Corrigan's ear. "The signal is still broadcasting from inside the building. It's strong. And it just changed. It's not broadcasting the Helios data anymore. It's a new message, a direct one." They hurried back to the mobile command center. On David's screen was a new text file left on Sterling's primary server for the whole company to see. "Adquem diem ego." Expecto, Elena translated it instantly. "To what day do I wait?" She recognized the line. It's from Cicero, a letter to his friend Atticus, written while he was in exile despairing. But it's also a trap. "What do you mean?" Arthur asked. "Thorne is a classicist. He knows this is a game of interpretation," Elena explained, her mind racing. "He's not just quoting Cicero. He's telling us he's waiting for something, a final confrontation, and he's leading us to it." "The signal is on the move," David announced. "It's heading down towards the sub-levels." The Bell Labs complex was famous for its anechoic chambers rooms, so perfectly soundproofed that you could hear your own blood flowing. They were located deep underground. "He's leading us into a labyrinth," Elena realized. Like the Minotaur, he wants a final dramatic confrontation in a place of his choosing. Suddenly, a new line of text appeared on the screen, this time without any classical origin. It was simple modern English. "Just you, Sterling. And your Sybil. Come alone." Corrigan immediately protested. "Absolutely not, Arthur. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Arthur said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "But it's one of his making. He's a poet, a dramatist. He's not going to end his epic with a simple ambush. He wants to talk. He wants to explain his Veritas Adamantina." He looked at Elena. A Sybil was a prophetess, a guide through the underworld. He trusted her. In the space of 3 days, she had become his interpreter, his guide in this strange war. Elena felt a tremor of fear, but also a sense of inevitability. This was her puzzle to solve, her opponent to face. "I'll go with you," she said. Leaving the armed security team behind, Arthur and Elena descended into the subterranean levels of the complex. The air grew colder. the silence more profound. They followed the winding concrete corridors guided by the signal strength on a handheld device David had given them. Finally, they came to a massive soundproofed door. It was the entrance to the largest of the anechoic chambers. The door was slightly ajar. The day he was waiting for, Elena whispered, was today. The anniversary of his dismissal from Sterling Enterprises. They pushed the door open and stepped inside. The change was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. All sound vanished. The door hissed shut behind them, plunging them into near total darkness and a silence so complete it was a physical pressure against their eardrums. From the darkness, a calm, cultured voice spoke, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome, Caesar," said the voice of Marcus Thorne. "I trust you brought the oracle who reads my entrails so well. I have been waiting. Let me show you the truth." The darkness in the anechoic chamber was absolute. It was a physical presence, a void that stripped away all sense of direction and scale. The silence was even more disorienting. Elena could hear the soft thud of her own heart, the whisper of air in her lungs. Then a single spotlight clicked on, illuminating a man sitting in a simple chair in the center of the vast, foam-covered room. It was Marcus Thorne. He was older than his file photo thinner, with streaks of grey in his hair, but his eyes burned with the same fierce intelligence. He was surrounded by a small array of electronics, a laptop and a transmitter. He looked less like a dangerous criminal and more like a deposed king holding court in his own private exile. An impressive performance. Ms. Vance. Thorne began, his voice calm and resonant in the dead air. "I confess I did not anticipate they would find someone who could actually read the language of my work. I assumed the barbarians would be hammering at the gates for months. Tell me, where did Sterling find you?" "That's not important," Elena said, her voice sounding flat and strange without any echo. "It's over, Marcus." Thorne laughed, a dry, academic chuckle. "Over, my dear, it has only just begun. I am not stealing data. I am liberating it. The Helios chip is a key, a master key to global communications. In Arthur Sterling's hands, it is a tool of control, a way for one empire to dominate all others. In the hands of the world, it is a tool of freedom. I have been broadcasting the design specifications piece by piece on public networks, hidden, of course, as poetry. By now, dozens of independent researchers will have captured the fragments. Soon they will piece it together. The empire will have no walls." Arthur stepped forward into the edge of the light. "You're a thief and a traitor, Thorne. You've destroyed years of work, compromised national security." "I have exposed a truth." Thorne's voice rose, losing its calm and gaining a fanatical edge. "Your golden silence, your NDAs, and your proprietary secrets, it's all a lie to protect your power. I offered you a new way to communicate, a beautiful, unbreakable method born from the foundations of Western thought, and you called it a vanity project. You cast me out. You who inherited an empire from your father. I built my intellect from nothing. I clawed my way into the halls of Yale. I mastered the languages of geniuses, and you dismissed me like a servant." He turned his intense gaze on Eleanor. "And you? Vance? Alistair Vance's daughter. Of course, it had to be. Your father was my rival at every turn. His work was celebrated. Mine was relegated to footnotes. He was the establishment, the grand old man of the classics. I was the radical. It seems I am destined to be undone by the House of Vance." This was the twist Elena hadn't seen coming. It wasn't just about Sterling. It was about academic jealousy, a bitterness that had festered for decades. "My father respected you," Elena said quietly. He called your work on Lucan's rhetorical structures dangerously brilliant. Thorn flinched as if struck. He said that— He did, she affirmed. He also said it lacked humanity, that you saw the poetry as a system, a code, but you missed the pain behind it. Thorn was silent for a moment, the revelation unsettling him. Arthur seized the opportunity. This is over, Marcus. The authorities have the building surrounded. Your broadcast has been isolated. You have failed. Have I? Thorn smiled, a chilling, triumphant expression. You think this was the only broadcast. You think the great work ends here. He tapped a key on his laptop. The main spotlight went out, and a projector whirred to life, casting an image onto the wall behind him. It was a countdown clock. It showed 2 minutes and 30 seconds. This is a dead man's switch, Thorn explained, his voice echoing slightly as he moved out of the chamber's sweet spot. When this timer hits 0, a final massive data packet will be released from a dozen servers I've hidden around the world. It won't be fragmented. It will be the complete, unencrypted, fully annotated Helios design. It will be posted on every open-source forum and torrent site simultaneously. My Veritas Adamantina. My unbreakable truth. There is no way to stop it. Panic flared in the room. Arthur turned to Eleanor, a question in his eyes. This was no longer a puzzle of language. This was a technical crisis. But Eleanor wasn't looking at the clock. She was looking at Thorn's whiteboard, which had been moved into the chamber. Amidst the Latin verses and network diagrams, there was one phrase circled in red. Finis coronat opus. The end crowns the work, she whispered to herself. It was a common phrase, but for a man like Thorn, nothing was common. He was a performer, a dramatist. The end had to be significant. He's lying, she said suddenly, her voice sharp. What? Arthur said, turning back to her. The dead man's switch. It's a bluff, she insisted, walking towards the whiteboard. It's too simple, too crude for him. It's not poetic. Finis coronat opus. His work isn't releasing the data. His work is this confrontation, the climax of his opera. She looked directly at Thorn. You never intended for the data to be fully released, did you? You just wanted to prove you could do it. You wanted to bring Caesar to his knees in your temple. The final release. There's a kill switch, isn't there? A final poetic couplet, a password only a true classicist would know. Thorn's triumphant smile faltered. For the first time, he looked uncertain. He had orchestrated every detail of this drama, and now this young woman was deconstructing his final act before it was finished. The clock ticked past 1 minute. It has to be from Lucan. Elena pressed her mind, racing through the thousands of lines she had memorized. A line about the futility of power, about the emptiness of victory. Something that would appeal to your sense of irony. She closed her eyes, searching. Not about Caesar's victory, but about Pompey's defeat. The tragedy. Book 7. The Battle of Pharsalus. Her eyes snapped open. That's it. The final password. It's the lament for the fallen republic. Libera sedentur populo suffragia, quis sit, qui non praetulerit piratica bella securi. She had recited it perfectly. If the people were given a free vote, who would not prefer the pirate wars to the axe? It was a bitter line about choosing a chaotic freedom over a tyrannical peace. Marcus Thorn stared at her, his face pale. He was utterly defeated. He hadn't been beaten by quantum computers or security teams. He had been beaten by a deeper understanding of his own soul, of the very poetry he had weaponized. The clock showed 10 seconds. Arthur looked at Eleanor, then at Thorn's laptop. He took a staggering leap of faith, trusting his Sibyl completely. He did not order his teams to shut down the power or attack the servers. He stood perfectly still. The clock hit 0. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only silence. Then on the monitors at the mobile command center, and on every screen in Sterling Enterprises, the data packet appeared. It was massive, labeled Helios Final. But it did not distribute. A single password prompt appeared in its place. Elena had been right. It was all a performance. The final act wasn't destruction. It was a demand for recognition. Slowly, Marcus Thorne sank into his chair. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a profound, weary emptiness. The poet had run out of words. The federal agents, alerted by Corrigan, flooded into the room, and the quiet, anticlimactic work of apprehending a broken man began. The aftermath was quiet. The crisis had been averted, not with a bang, but with a whispered line of ancient poetry. As Marcus Thorne was led away, he looked at Elena one last time, a complex expression on his face, not of hatred, but of a strange, bitter respect. He had found his intellectual equal, his critic at the very end of his war. Back in the gleaming, sterile environment of the Sterling Tower war room, the mood was one of subdued jubilation and profound disbelief. David Chen humbled approached Elena. "What you did back there?" He started, then paused, searching for the right words. It was a different kind of genius. We were trying to solve the problem with math. You solved it with meaning. It was the highest praise he could offer an admission that his world of logic and code was not the only one that mattered. Arthur Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city lights. The last 3 days had shaken him to his core. His empire, built on the bedrock of unbreakable logic, had been nearly toppled by the ghosts of history, by the power of a story. He turned to face Elena. "Your 1-week contract is over," he said, his tone formal. Elena's heart sank slightly. She had expected this. She was a consultant, a specialist brought in for a specific problem. Now that the problem was solved, she would be paid and sent back to her world of clearing tables and managing tips. She had tasted her old life again, and the thought of returning to the trattoria was like a physical ache. "I understand," she said, gathering her things. "Thank you for the opportunity." However, Arthur continued, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "I would like to offer you a new one, a permanent one. What Thorne did was malicious, but the principle behind it, the idea that patterns from history, from language, from art, can be used to solve modern problems, that is revolutionary." He walked towards her. "I am creating a new division at Sterling Enterprises. It won't deal with code or hardware. It will deal with context, with human nature, with the why behind the what. We'll call it the Applied Humanities Division. It will be a team of historians, linguists, and philosophers who will work alongside our technical teams to see the patterns they can't, to predict threats based not on data, but on ideology, to be the interpreters of the human element that technology so often ignores." He stopped in front of her. "I want you to build it and run it. Director Vance, you can name your salary. You'll have access to any resource you require. Your only mandate is to ensure we are never this blind again." Elena was speechless. It was an offer that went beyond money. It was a chance to build a bridge between the two worlds. She had inhabited the world of ancient ideas and the world of modern power. It was a chance to finish her father's work, to prove that the classics were not a dead subject, but a living, breathing source of wisdom essential to the future. She thought of the weight of the water pitcher in her hand, the smell of burnt garlic, the ache in her feet. She thought of the years of feeling her mind slowly atrophy. And then she thought of the thrill of the chase, the joy of unlocking a puzzle that no one else could, the feeling of her own mind, sharp and clear and powerful. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I accept." Arthur nodded, the smile reaching his eyes now. "Welcome to the board, Director Vance." As Eleanor walked out of the Sterling Tower that evening, she was no longer Eleanor Vance, the waitress. She was Director Vance, the scholar who had saved $1 billion company. The rain had stopped, and the New York City skyline glittered around her, no longer a symbol of a world she couldn't reach, but a landscape of possibilities. She hadn't just solved a case. She had reclaimed her life, armed with nothing more than a dead language and the unbreakable truth that the past is never truly dead. It's just waiting for the right person to translate it. That was the incredible story of Elena Vance and Arthur Sterling. It's a powerful reminder that brilliance isn't always found in boardrooms or in the people with the most impressive titles. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, waiting in the quiet corners of the world, in the minds of those we overlook. Elena's journey shows us that the skills we cultivate out of passion, the languages we learn, the history we study, the art we love, are never useless. They are the keys that can unlock the most complex problems in the most unexpected ways. Her story is a testament to the power of a different kind of intelligence, proving that in an age of machines, our greatest asset is still our humanity. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story about an underdog, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true life dramas that will inspire and amaze you. Thank you for listening.